What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Discovering Bob Dylan podcast. You may be asking yourself, haven't we discovered enough Bob Dylan? The answer to that is no, of course, because every time you think you've got a beat on him, he switches it up. He does something zany, something wacky, something unexpected. And the album we'll be talking about tonight, I believe, falls into that category. We are discussing Shadows in the Night, Bob Dylan's, well, it's a standards album, also kind of a Frank Sinatra covers album. It's kind of both at the same time. His 36th came out in 2015, and I don't know. I wasn't a, I wasn't following Bob Dylan's career at the time, so I don't know how surprising this was when it was leaked, when it was released. However the word got out about, hey, Bob Dylan's doing a Frank Sinatra covers album. Yeah, that sounds about right. But how did you, as a follower of Bob at the time, Dylan, co-hosts, great to see you, of course. How did you take that news that Bob Dylan was doing this type of album?
Well, I think it's pretty analogous to the record that was just released 5.5 years before it, Christmas in the Heart, in terms of the reaction being, you got to be kidding me. There's absolutely no way that this is actually happening. It is actually happening. Um, but the more you think about it, the more it does make sense, given, like we've discussed numerous times on this program, Dylan's reverence for the history of music, and the importance of popular music and everything that it entails culturally and otherwise. And, when you get into the Great American Songbook, as it is, songs written by, you know, Buddy Kaye, Irving Berlin. I don't think there's any Cole Porter songs on this particular record, but certainly you throw him in the mix as well. Um, those composers, these songs have been so important to popular music, becoming standards in jazz and pop, and those inform, all music informs each other, and especially in the pre rock and roll era, the 40s and 50s. It's not uncommon to every now and then hear your Lonnie Johnsons and your Josh Whites to break out a quote unquote show tune done in a folk or a bluesy way, or so on and so forth. So it definitely makes sense. And certainly, um, given that this album is, as you said, for all intents and purposes, a Sinatra, say a tribute album, not a covers album, because Sinatra not known particularly for being a composer, but um, the interpreter of song that he is, and everything that he meant culturally, the impact that he had on music and in general. Of course, that means something to Bob. So, of course, in the year of our Lord 2015, when he is about to turn 74 years old with those nice silky pipes of his, he's finally going to come out with his big tribute to Frank. So I think that was the reaction at the time, one of initial surprise, and maybe the surprise never fully goes away, but you come to understand it the more that you consider who Bob Dylan is in his entirety.
And Dylan actually had the idea to do a standards album way back in 1978 when he heard Willie Nelson's Stardust album, which same concept basically without the Sinatra connection. Country. It was Willie Nelson. If you're not familiar with the album, Willie Nelson doing standards, Great American Songbook in his own very Willie Nelson way. So 50 years later, he finally gets around to it. Whatever. Bob was a big fan of Frank Sinatra, and it's an interesting selection of tunes. It's not like the big, Sinatra hits. Nothing, nothing from any Nelson Riddle arranged albums. The three albums that produce or supply the songs for Shadows of the Night were "Where Are You," "No One Cares," and "All Alone." Um, and I believe "No One Cares" Sinatra called his Suicide Songs album. So these are like the darkest, sort of saddest songs in his oeuvre. And interesting that Dylan would take those. But there's a great quote from him, and Dylan said, "I don't see myself as covering these songs in any way. They've been covered enough, buried, as a matter of fact. What me and my band are basically doing is uncovering them, lifting them out of the grave, and bringing them into the light of the day, into the light of day." Um, so
Classic Bob.
yeah, classic kind of curmudgeonly Bob there. He had another good quote. When you start doing these songs, Frank's got to be on your mind because he is the mountain. That's the mountain you have to climb. And if you don't get part of the way there, it's hard to find a song he did not do. People talk about Frank all the time. He had this ability to get inside of a song in a sort of conversational way. Frank sang to you, not at you. I never wanted to be a singer that sings at somebody. I've always wanted to sing to somebody. Certainly nobody worshipped Sinatra in the 60s like they did in the 40s, but he never went away. All those other things that we thought were here to stay, they did go away, but he never did. So obviously he holds Sinatra up, great performer, great interpreter of song, great crafter of these tunes. And, like you were saying, this is another part of the Great American, music scene. He's covered some of the other ones, all of the other ones basically at this point. He took from traditional and folk and blues, and he weaved in some kind of standards sounding tunes on his post 2000 albums as well. And now he's going straight for the crooners. It's an interesting one. It was relatively popular, relatively well received by the critics. Not quite as, maybe as much as Tempest or some of his original albums, but, you know, people were kind of, tickled by it, I think. Some, Pitchfork didn't like it, but they were a bunch of no fun having jerks back then. Everyone else seemed to pretty much be, with it, with Bob Dylan's vision. So it's cool.
So
It's
so
cool.
for you, I think I kind of know where you stand, but historically, what has been your relationship with whatever you want to call it, vocal pop, jazz, the crooners of the 50s and that whole scene?
I mean, I love Sinatra, and
Have you always been a Sinatra fan?
I mean, it's funny. My grandpa, huge Sinatra guy, so
Mhm.
I grew up listening fairly regularly to some, good Frank Sinatra albums. I don't know if they really had much of an effect on me, but later in my life, probably, mid 30s, early 30s, I started to kind of get back into Sinatra and start appreciating him more and more. And I've always liked that type of music. It was just, Sinatra just wasn't really on my radar that
Mhm.
much. He kind of fell out of favor for a while. I think he's back as far as, kind of revered for his greatness, and people recognize his, you know, brilliance as an interpreter of songs. And other than Sinatra, I'm not like a big Bing Crosby guy or a big, I don't even know who else would be back in those days. I wasn't, not that into the Rat Pack, stuff like that. But the big names, I do love a good Ray Charles take on the American Songbook. obviously Sinatra, and then I like it when people like Elvis Costello and more modern musicians kind of touch those. Maybe not Rod Stewart, but I think most other people have the reverence and the good taste to make these songs their own. And I think the songs themselves are almost universally brilliant. And it really just depends on the interpreter as far as like making them into something new or different or whatever.
Sure,
I like these songs, and I was familiar with a lot of these before I heard the Bob Dylan versions.
sure. Yeah, I was just wondering because it, it was one of those things where I grew up listening to so much quote unquote old music, classic music. Um, but you know, the crooners, your Frank Sinatra's, Perry Como's, Dean Martin, so on and so forth. That was distinctly for me like the quintessential, like, oh, well, that's my grandma's music kind of thing, very, very sort of close-minded viewpoint. It definitely wasn't until later in high school that I would have had anything I think resembling an open mind. I think I always recognized that Sinatra was important and good for what it was, but not anything I wanted to listen to. And then I think sometime in college I would have heard In the Wee Small Hours for the first time, and that opened up my mind a little bit. And I've always been a big fan of jazz, instrumental jazz, but that never really sort of crossed over into a full appreciation for, I think, the vocal side of it all. I think certainly I dig some Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, but they have always felt like distinctly jazz musicians as opposed to the crooners where it's living in more or of the pop world of the day. And I think these days I like and appreciate it more than I ever have. It's still not music that I'm rushing to throw on the old stereo system a whole hell of a lot. Um, so, I guess that is the forewarning on my end that anything we talk about today, maybe anything that I say, should be taken with a grain of sand in terms of me not being any authority, I think, to speak on this. Which I'll give a shout at. I know that you've both verbally and physically reprimanded me for even mentioning other YouTube channels on this show in the past. So I'm really taking a big leap of faith here that you'll forgive me. um, but our friend Alex runs a great channel called The Music Deep Dive here on YouTube. And Alex is one of the smartest music critics, listeners, reviewers that I know. And he has a great understanding of and reverence for this general era. He's done full discography rankings of Tony Bennett, and I know I can't remember if he's done Sinatra or not, but he's phenomenal. So go give Music Deep Dive a follow, and then come talk to Alex and me and Joe in the Discord group, which you can gain access to by donating to the Taste Like Music Patreon for just $1 if you'd like.
Just yes, thank you for that plug. And yes, Alex, incredibly smart, almost too smart. He's threatening to me as someone who's not quite as smart as him. But we digress. Let's get back to the heart of the matter here, and that is Shadows in the Night. I guess we can get into the songs, I suppose, right? I mean, that's what we're here for, talking about the music, the Bob Dylan-ness.
Yeah.
Um,
So what was your expectation going into this?
I think I at this point, I expected to think it was pretty good and probably, I don't know. His kind of old-fashioned croonery type songs that he's been doing since Love and Theft have been some of my favorites on the albums. So, why not? Why not do a full, Sinatra tribute here? I know his voice has degraded and it continues to degrade slightly.
You think?
So, I thought you were serious. Um, but the crooner songs, he seems to have a little extra to give to those. And I figured, you know what? If he's going to do it, he's probably going to make it at least, decent. He's not going to totally phone it in here. For whatever reason, I can hear in my head Dylan singing Strangers in the Night. And I don't think he's ever done that. But I don't know why. I get this image of Bob Dylan just crooning out Strangers in the Night. Feels like a good fit. So I was a little disappointed that's not on here. And this is, we've talked about this before. It's not a just throwaway, hey, I need a hit type album. We talked about this with, um, you know, Christmas in the Heart. It's just Bob Dylan being Bob Dylan. It's not Bob Dylan owing the record company an album or anything like that. So get that out of the way. This is a real Bob Dylan album, not some half-assed, throwaway of Sinatra just because he needs money or he's Rod Stewart and he just wants to torture people. I think this album is pretty good. I'll just get that out of the way right there. I think more of that has to do with Donnie Herron than Bob Dylan. But I think Bob Dylan is game. I think he gives it his best shot. I think the songs he chooses are very good. I think it's an excellent selection. I really do like I'm a Fool to Want You to lead things off. You get the pedal steel substituting for the strings and the orchestration. And Donnie Herron just absolutely murders it. It's incredible the sound that he produces. It's heavenly. It's transcendent what he's doing on pedal steel to, you know, not emulate these strings and orchestration, but give these songs like a whole new direction and spin on them. And I think that's important because it's not just some craven, half-assed imitation of the originals. It's Bob Dylan taking them and using Donnie Herron's pedal steel, and there's some brass orchestration, but I think the crux of it is Donnie Herron's pedal steel to give these songs the unique Bob Dylan touch. And I think that's what makes this album more successful than unsuccessful. So that I appreciated right off the bat. Obviously, I love pedal steel. If you don't like pedal steel, you may have a problem with, that choice. But for someone like me, and I feel like most Bob Dylan fans in general are going to like the pedal steel, I think it was an excellent choice. Bob Dylan's vocals, they're not great, but he's game. I think, a great majority of the time he gets there, like he gets to the right note. The journey in between notes sometimes little, some zigzags and some off course, and it's not mellifluous.
What is life if not the journey, Joe?
Yes. Bob Dylan has proved nothing. It's a bit of a bumpy ride sometimes. The pitch, not Frank Sinatra level, we'll say that. The vibrato, again, there's some there's some issues. I actually found myself liking this listen much more on a stereo than in like headphones, where I really am like, suscepted to like every little like pitch, wrong pitch and kind of off note. Listening to in the car actually was my preferred way to do it. I was grooving to it actually driving home today, and I was like, huh, this sounds pretty good when you're not. you know, totally worried about every little, note here or there. I think as a whole, most of these songs are pretty successful. The Night We Called It a Day has a great brass arrangement. Stay With Me, again, Donnie Heron killing it. A lot of these songs start out with the pedal steel and they have this lovely little intros to a bunch of them that really sets the mood well. Tony Garnier on bass also deserves lots of credit. Some real nice bass work throughout. I think the most successful songs are the ones that have a more limited vocal range. The requirements not too great, so that it's not all falling on Bob's shoulders to provide the melody. Um, Stay With Me is one where he kind of sounds like he's drunk when he's singing it, but actually probably so was Sinatra when he was remembering his. So Sinatra, though, you couldn't tell. With Bob Dylan, sometimes it's just like, oh, I don't think he's drunk, but he kind of sounds like it with some of this pitch control. I think What I'll Do is a little rough, as far as like, it's an Irving Berlin. I don't know if he quite has the melodic capabilities anymore to really pull something like that off. But I think That Lucky Old Sun's a great closer. I think he sings that pretty well. Same with Full Moon and Empty Arms. I think is one of the highlights for sure. Yeah, I think it's a pretty good album. And like I said, I think the arrangements are really successful. And I imagine Bob Dylan had a great deal to do with that. And I think it covers up enough of the deficiencies in his own voice. I think he does a pretty good job, holding his own. He's game for it. He's trying. He's injecting enough of his own personality along with the production and arrangements that I think overall it works. I don't think it's as good as Tempest. I don't think it's as good as any of his original albums, probably from post 2000. But I would put it pretty high on my list of albums where he's not playing all originals, and definitely better than most of the '80s stuff. So um, I think it's pretty successful. I'm probably at like a high 3.5 stars, and I would listen again. I think I went back and listened to the originals from Sinatra, the Where Are You and No One Cares, and the other one, and I prefer those versions for the most part, but I think some of these with the arrangements and the change to pedal steel uh, are pretty close actually. So I was impressed with that, and I mean I don't know if I need four more discs
It
covers that
doesn't
mix it
matter
up.
if you need them or not because they're
I'm gonna get
coming.
them. It's a lean 35 minutes, 10 songs. I think it works.
Yeah, got to be a shortest album in a minute. Oh, Christmas in the Heart isn't that long. Um, Also, it's just still sitting here from when we recorded our episode. Still got it. Yeah, it watches over me every time I work at this desk. Okay, so a couple things. So you re-listened to it today coming home from work. So there's an afternoon listen. Did you happen to listen to it? Did you get any nighttime listens of this record in by any chance?
Well, I was listening to it before we recorded, so it's nighttime here. One of the first lessons, because we've had a couple false starts getting this thing recorded. Um, but yes, one of the lessons was post sundown. I didn't have a whiskey
Oh,
on the
there you go.
rocks, and I wasn't smoking a cigar or a pipe or whatever you did back in those days. But
Yeah.
I was in the twilight after dark kind of mood.
Yeah, I was rushing home from a rehearsal that was running late to record this and kind of got in the way of my plans. I was gonna throw on a robe and uh, try to get in the mood here. But
Roaring Fire.
yeah, but alas, here I am in a band t-shirt that I've owned for about, geez, 16 years. So what can you do? Life isn't fair, as Malcolm in the Middle once said. Um, so okay, yeah, this because it's one that I find works really well either in the early morning or late at night. So I just didn't know if you had that experience. I also didn't know if you watched the music video for The Night We Called It a Day or the live performance of it on one of Letterman's last shows that I sent you.
You know what? I didn't. I'm not gonna lie to you. I could have lied there and
It's
said
cool.
yes.
No, it's fine. You just don't
Again,
value
we've
the.
been so scattered these last weeks that
Hmm.
must have
No,
slipped.
yeah, no, it's definitely my fault that you didn't watch the things that I sent you weeks ago. It's fine. I don't even care. What you would be talking about if you watched them, uh, especially the music video, is I mean, it's another in the long line of hilarious videos that Dylan has had. Um, we had Must Be Santa with Christmas in the Heart and Duquesne Whistle for Tempest, and then Night We Called It a Day. He inserts himself into a 1940s style film noir, and it's fantastic. There's a pistol and a trench coat involved. You'll have to go back and watch it. Recommended watching for everybody watching this right now. Um, and the reason that I sent along him singing it is, when I think about this album, there's two things in particular I think about. The first is the amazing engineer work, I believe, by Al Schmidt, who uh, worked with everybody back in the day. I can't remember if he actually ever worked with Sinatra. I think he did. I know he definitely worked on the Genius Loves Company record, the Ray Charles record, bunch of Diana Krall stuff. He worked with a lot of classic people, and his engineering work on this record is sublime. I love being able to hear the brushes on the drums so clearly, to the point where it's almost like you can hear every individual small metal brush touching down on the drum. It's so intimate. The way that Bob's vocals are recorded, you hear a couple little, like, it, it's like you're right there with them. You hear all the slides on the bass. Just masterful recording work. And the other is Bob's vocals, which, yeah, definitely a journey from note to note, but I think they're very honest vocal performances. And what I mean by that, I think more so is that the last few albums we were starting to get very growly. We were definitely getting a little Tom Waitsy, Cookie Monster on Together Through Life, Christmas in the Heart, and Tempest, and certainly the ability is still there. You hear it on songs. You hear it in Soon After Midnight and Little Drummer Boy. I mean that very genuinely. His ability to clean it up and whatnot, but I really do think that some aspect of this album and the overall Sinatra period was him kind of like refamiliarizing himself with his love of truly singing. And yeah, even if there's a flat note or a very flat note, or you don't really understand how he got from note A to note B, you can tell that there's truly a lot of heart in it, and um, I think a lot of intention and passion in it, which comes from the aforementioned reverence of the material and him understanding you know, there's going to be ridicule no matter what. Like, oh, here's Bob Dylan, a guy who's never been able to sing, covering, old Blue Eyes, let alone Dylan in his 70s reduced to this, you know, raspy growl or whatever. He knows he's not going to escape that, but it could be, I think, so much worse than it was. I think his approach to the last few albums before this, they work for those albums, but they would not have worked for this one. And I think he does a pretty admirable job, all things considered. Certainly a much better job than a lot of people would anticipate. And I'm not going to sit here and say or try to argue that these are all-time vocal performances, because they're not, certainly not from a technical angle. And I think very few of these songs would be among my all-time favorite Bob Dylan vocal performances. But as someone who is attuned to this artist and I think has as good a read as any of us can have on what this guy's thought process is or what his intentions are, I think you can tell this is a genuine effort. And I do appreciate that. Overall, this is a record. Funnily enough, listening to it in preparation for this episode, again, I've been listening to it on and off for the last 10 years. And full disclosure, certainly listening to it a lot less than a lot of other Dylan records because, this is not my favorite style of music. It's maybe not inherently what I want to hear when I think about listening to Bob Dylan. And it's an album that works best for a particular mood or vibe or whatever you want to call it. But I was prepared to come on here and say, I'm not a huge fan of this record. And maybe that's still true, but I found it just ever so slightly growing on me. And never that I disliked it or that I even really dislike any of the songs all that much. I perhaps my biggest hot take amongst people who consider themselves fans of this style of music is that I've never been much a fan of the song Autumn Leaves, other than the magnificent performance on the Cannonball Adderley record, Something Else, which is an all instrumental jazz performance. Just not a song that I've ever been in love with. But other than that, I like all these songs. I've just only ever gravitated towards this so much. And it's a very slow record. There aren't a lot of barn burners on this record from a tempo standpoint, from a large dynamic standpoint, but it is solid. So before this record was announced, I saw Bob in November 2014, and yeah, knew nothing about it whatsoever, that it was in the works. And all things considered, standard Dylan show. But he actually came back for an encore and closed the show with Stay With Me, which is on this record. I had no idea. And in fact, the only songs I think I really knew when it came out, I knew Stay With Me only because he had played it. And then I was familiar with Autumn Leaves and That Lucky Old Sun. Other than that, my initial introduction to these songs was pretty blind. But I remember thinking at that show, like, this is a really striking song and arrangement. And, it had been God knows how many years since he had debuted any new material before. But, maybe this is a sign that he has a new album of original material coming. And I was half right. And that is still one of my favorite songs. I love the melodicism of that song in particular. Sometimes I struggle. There's a particular I don't want to call these melodies angular because I don't think that is the right word. At least, I tend to associate angularity with more like sort of like post-punk new wave stuff. But a lot of vocal jazz, you know, 1950s pop, whatever you call it, there's a particular harmonic approach and these tonal jumps that, for whatever reason, maybe it's just because I've been so exposed to your general like bluesy folky melodies throughout my life, and those are applied to so many different types of rock and roll and western music, if you will. And um the majority of jazz that I listened to and still listen to tends to be instrumental, that sometimes the vocal aspect of it just doesn't always hit me the right way. But Stay With Me sort of is like an outlier there. It has this really sort of like lilting, like it's almost like I could hear him doing an arrangement of that song on Good As I've Been to You or World Gone Wrong. Like I feel like it would fit in there if he tried. Um, so I've always been a big fan of that. And uh, that Lucky Old Son for me is the massive standout of the album. It's the one where he really goes for it the most with those high notes. And you could argue all you want about his technique or anything like that. I think it's awesome personally. Sounds like he's hitting the note to me. And again, he's approaching it, I think, with a lot more honesty than maybe the way he was approaching certain things on maybe Self-Portrait or other projects in the 70s or 80s that have not been as critically lauded. And I completely agree with you. I think Donnie Heron is the star of the show here. Um, Incredible playing. I think it's hysterical that guitar god Charlie Sexton was brought back for this record just for the guitar to not be one of the more noticeable instruments. And I do love that there are two guitarists on this record. I think you could have gotten away with having one guitar. That's neither here nor there. But the band arrangements are really great, and there's a lot of space to let Bob's voice shine, and Bob steps back in the arrangements enough for them to produce a really nice underlying effort in everything. I'm a Fool to Want You, I think, is a fantastic opener. I think that kind of sets the intention. And I definitely think what was the Sinatra record that you just said that he described as his suicide note record?
That is No One
No one
Cares.
cares. Yeah, given the title, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And In the Wee Small Hours, definitely a bit of a sad bastard record too. Not all of these songs are necessarily sad bastard songs, but this, I think, is definitely along the lines of, I think, World Gone Wrong, in the sense that, whereas Good As I've Been to You was a bit more like, I'm going to pick out a bunch of, blues and American folk and English folk songs that I like and just pick out the best ones and put them out. World Gone Wrong was, no, I'm going to try to create sort of a thematic whole here. And I think that you very much get that with Shadows in the Night. Maybe not so much on the following record, which we'll talk about in a second. Um, but yeah, this album to me sounds like Shadows in the Night. There's not a whole lot of bright, sunshiny summary bops on here, if you will, as the kids might call them. But they work. They really work together. And I think the 35-minute runtime helps with the sort of slower pace of everything. So yeah, it's I think it's fascinating. And I think that it is again a really interesting left turn in a career that continues to give us left turns. Okay, I guess we're entering this, and I don't think that any of us anticipate that we'd be getting 2/4 more albums, depending on how you look at it, of this material, which kind of enhances the zaniness of it. Not an album like I said, that I return to a whole lot, but like I said, returning to it over the last few weeks in preparation for this episode, again, enjoyed it maybe more to some degree that I've always respected and appreciated it. And I don't know how much I'm ever gonna hold it in a very high esteem. I imagine when we do our ranking, it will not be making my top half. Spoiler alert. But I think that it is objectively one of the more interesting and I don't know if I want to say important, because I think there's a lot of his releases that you could argue are important. But given how many twists and turns his career has taken, I do think this one is particularly notable. So I give it credit for that. So yeah, it's totally all right by me. Shadows in the Night.
Yeah, it's a pleasing album, and now we're about to be subjected to four more albums worth of the same thing, which I don't know how I feel about that at this point. I feel like one would have been like the perfect amount, and I don't. I now this being from someone who has no idea what Fallen Angels or Triplicate sounds like, but just my opinion, one of these was probably the right amount of these.
Well,
And it,
I'm certainly not here to confirm nor deny your inkling there. What I will say is that, in my opinion, the next two albums aren't exactly just Shadows in the Night Part 2 and Shadows in the Night Part 3 and 4 and 5. Although the next album, and spoiler, we will be talking about both of these records, Fallen Angels from 2016 and Triplicate 2017 in the next episode. And there was some debate about this because the next record, Fallen Angels, was, I believe, recorded during the same sessions for Fallen Angels. It is the Dylan 1973 to this album's self portrait. So we were debating, well, do we then cover those records in the same episode, especially because Triplicate is a triple album that we need to talk about. But I personally felt, and either you agreed or you didn't feel like thinking about it too hard, so you just acquiesced. I'm gonna pretend it was the first so I can have a continued inflated sense of self-importance. That what Shadows in the Night, I think, sort of stands for in the grand scheme of his career is important enough to help it warrant its own episode. So we will touch upon Fallen Angels in the next episode. I might even argue, and this is what I'll tell you to keep in mind. I mean, I guess keep in mind that it's from the same sessions as Shadows in the Night, because I don't think it necessarily sounds that way. I think there's a couple curveballs in there, and maybe even a couple curveballs as it pertains to my opinions on the record. But we will certainly touch on that. So that's what's coming up next. My only question for you is, if I told you even 3 years ago that you would listen to Bob Dylan's 2015 album of Sinatra songs, and you would give it, in your own words, a high 3.5 stars in this landscape that you've created of boiling one's enjoyment of a record down to a number, uh, that you would give this record a high 3.5 stars, would you believe me? Or would you call the cops on me because you assume that I skipped all the other drugs I've never done and went straight for meth?
Well, first I'd probably have to think about where my life had gone wrong that I'd even be discussing such a subject.
Fair, fair, true.
Um, actually, if you had said that, I probably would have been like, okay, maybe that makes sense because it's Sinatra. So, I don't really like Dylan, but maybe Sinatra, injects some magic into him and perks him up for a 3.5 stars. But everything else sucks from Bob Dylan, is what I would have said back
Naturally, yeah.
then. I've grown now, and yeah, I don't think that would have been that crazy to say. Now, I probably wouldn't have known about Fallen Angels and Triplicate immediately following it, and I probably, would have had something snarky to say about Bob Dylan and Frank Sinatra and
Well,
too much, just much too much. Bob Dylan in love with himself again, thinking he's better than Sinatra, trying to one up Sinatra. Damn that Bob Dylan is what I would have said.
well, I listen, I don't know if Sinatra ever did a triple album. Uh, Comment below if you do know. Looking at you, Alex. But what I do know is that even though you are going to have to listen to Triplicate, which is a triple album of Bob Dylan doing the Great American Songbook, and it is in fact 95 minutes and 42 seconds long. It's over an hour and a half. Be grateful because this sort of thing is not uncommon in this particular realm of music. The famous example is Ella Fitzgerald singing the George and Ira Gershwin songbook, and that album is 196 minutes long. So count your blessings.
Well, no, I won't. I won't say. I won't compare Ella Fitzgerald and Bob Dylan's vocal ability. I won't. I won't go there. Let that.
Wow.
Let that go.
You're such a martyr.
All right, so I guess we're gonna listen to Fallen Angels and Triplicate. That's a big ask of people. I mean,
That's why
at least
we're
I'm
here.
making a couple bucks off of this. These people are gonna have to do this on their own time and their own dime. So that's rough. But if you do make it through both, you can come back and watch the next episode and,
I
agree or
think I
disagree.
think you
But
should watch anyway just to see if you've survived.
read the Wikipedia entry about it. Same thing. Come back, watch us here. There's only a couple more of these episodes remaining before we get into some rankings and retrospectives and whatnot. So do that. Fallen Angels and Triplicate special double episode will be coming up next time here on Discovering Bob Dylan podcast. The usual, like the video, subscribe to the channel, check the description for all the links to our social media accounts, Facebook, X, Instagram, all that good stuff. You can find a link to our Patreon, which you can join for as little as $1 per month. You can join the Discord, talk to us and Alex. He'll be there too. Um, we'll be there also, but Alex will definitely be there. And yeah, get ready for more Bob Dylan trying to be Frank Sinatra. How do I
You
end
man,
this?
no, you got to keep this in. You can edit out anything else, but you have to keep. I want
I was
everyone.
rolling. I was rolling there, and
How
then
many years have you been doing this now?
just like Bob Dylan, I don't know when to quit. I don't
All
know.
right, there we go. He brought it back, baby.
See ya.
have something to say. Is that right? Can you not tell that I'm doing something? I know. It is almost your snack time. But I can't buy your snacks if I don't make these tens of dollars on this episode. I know. It's very sad. That's capitalism, baby. Okay. Sorry. You can that can be a clip for the Patreon exclusive. What was I saying? Anyway.